In early autumn 2019, I invited a group of artists, academics and researchers to swim with me into a series of sea caves at Livermead in the Torbay Marine Conservation Zone, southwest UK. My invitation arose from conversations around my field research activities and was informal, with minimal direction, my description of swimming into intertidal marine caves acting as lure. During our crossing, we swim closely together, bounded by practice as ritual making, new rites for troubling troubled times. In my field notes I have written, "It is early evening. The four of us slip into the rough water at high tide and swim together into the first chamber. The waves are too wild. We can't enter any of the others, but swim to all their entrances before turning back. When we climb from the sea, the full moon is rising, huge, red, the harvest moon. In the moments after clambering from the water and onto the rocks, we elatedly acknowledge the collective performance of our journey and how we connected in an unspoken, common objective. Swimming together, we had shared an intention, loosely formed and freely entered into. Our swim became ritualization, something described by scholar Catherine Bell, which, in a very preliminary sense, is a way of acting that is designed and orchestrated to distinguish and privilege what is being done in comparison to other, usually more quotidian activities. Our tacit and unprompted acceptance of our strategic and practical orientation for acting moved us beyond individual concerns of immediate experience to notice this marine habitat, our implication and entanglements. Sirens is a film and sound composition made with field recordings and field notes from these journeys into the caves, and I will speak about my research for this work in this presentation. My methods and research for Sirens commit to an acknowledgement of an ecology of the senses, how non-humans and humans sense the environment, what it is possible to sense, and why we sense the world. In our era of habitat degradation and loss, we are crossing multiple ecological tipping points and witnessing the advent of cascading climate change. It is vital for us to think again about how we apprehend the places we inhabit and have long exploited through our dependence on an extractive and racial capitalism. My use of the pronoun we here is problematic, as highlighted by Elaine Gann, speaking at the Neuhaus Symposium in 2019, who remarks on the importance of considering who or what we mean when we say we. Elaine Gann's comment reflects on who we are counting, who gets to profit, and who is expendable, who are the disenfranchised and the dispossessed. And in Donna Haraway's words, who are we, what are we, who and what are we that is not only human? Professor of Inhuman Geography, Catherine Youssef, calls for the need for an ethics of the insensible, which she terms as the force or motivation oscillating between the material and virtual, inhuman and human, organic and non-organic, time and the untimely. Youssef writes that in order to create this, we need to understand something of how sense is enrolled into our habits of thought and theories of materiality. These habits and theories have arisen through a Western-coded way of thinking the world, and I argue that challenging the human centrism that defines this worldview is crucial if we are to create what Yusuf calls new practices of sensations and new sensibilities around such diffuse, recalcitrant and dislocated issues as biodiversity loss and climate change. Threading through my research and artworks for Sirens is my intention to ask what kind of thinking might usefully guide our swim at this particular time and in this particular place. I intend our watery trip to be a journey towards thinking with care and aligned with concerns of feminist post-humanities, described by Cecilia Usbeer and Marietta Radomska, who comment, long-standing feminist theory practices of decolonizing the domains of the universal man idea mark a particularly critical and creative source for the planetary forms of post-humanities we claim is needed. We live in an era where we face uncertain and inhospitable futures, and in order to think through the habits that define our current crisis, I believe that we must shift our tolerance of notions of human exceptionalism, approach our responsibility, and reimagine our role as humans in relation to other species and entities. Haraway's term, responsibility, central within many of her writings, suggests what Cecilia Usbeer refers to as a cultivated ethical sensitivity and process of responding through entangled encounters between species, and marks a shift towards an inclusive, democratic, and responsive process of being and thinking. Drawing upon feminist theory is helpful in this effort of thinking with care. As Maria Puig de la Bella Casa writes, in feminist discussions, as well as in activism, the politics of caring remain at the heart of concerns with exclusions and critiques of power dynamics in stratified worlds. Bella Casa approaches care both as a modality and object of speculation, which in turn shapes her central argument that an ethical reorganization of human, non-human relations is vital, but what this means in terms of caring obligations that could enact non-exploitative forms of togetherness cannot be imagined once for all. Practices of care and curiosity inform my methodologies and my extended notions of data collection. These include using a variety of new and alternative ways of measuring, such as through imagination and other observational methods, which enable me to engage in speculative thinking and to notice. For as academic Mary Louise Pratt says, noticing attunes us to worlds otherwise. In my field notes I have written, we are in a choppy sea, at high tide, way out deep and looking back to land. The cliffs glow russet-coloured, and treading water, I describe how this Permian red breccia is made from desert sands and carries in its strata the evidence of massive and violent flash flooding, and how approximately 252 million years ago its era ended in the largest mass extinction event that Phanerozoic Earth has witnessed. My fieldwork involves multiple and varied trips to gather field data from these local littoral zone marine caves. There is an ethics in my choice of this location, as it is possible for me to access this nearby place repeatedly, to look and look again, my frequent visits generating a study of long duration. Here also, in this familiar urban location, I am framing the urgency of recognizing the force of human-driven global transformations in the very local, in order to open up what Aspear and Radomska refer to as a space for situated, multidirectional and practice-based processes of knowledge production. Marine caves are distributed throughout the rocky coastlines of Europe, but they are a relatively scarce habitat. The UK's submerged and partially submerged sea caves are the most varied and extensive on the Atlantic coast of Europe, with many examples of wave-eroded marine caves found in Torbay, from Mackerel Cove in the north to Sharkham Point in the south. In this special area of conservation, they occur in different rock types and at levels from above the high water mark of spring tides down to permanently flooded caves lying in the infralittoral zone. Sea caves are dynamic environments, now facing accelerated risk of complete destruction from increasingly frequent extreme weather events. Research published in 2018 showed that average winter wave heights along the Atlantic coasts of Western Europe have been rising for 7 decades. Wave heights during extreme weather conditions have increased by an average of 1.7 metres during the past 70 years, causing more energetic storm events, which are the main factor affecting coastal cliff erosion. Subject to more frequent wave surges, the processes through which the caves were formed are also the mechanisms through which they will be more rapidly destroyed. In amongst the rocky shores of Torbay's Marine Conservation Zone, climate breakdown can be read in the action of the waves and the rapid changes to the land's edges. My field research takes me to sites whose vulnerability makes me uncomfortably aware of the problem of being the problem. Many of the caves have joint Nature Conservation Committee vulnerability assessments, which is an assessment of possible impacts on habitats and species from human activities. My discomfort arises from privileging my observations and entering where all other than human, plants, animals and things are made vulnerable by my actions. This activity seeks to meet Anna Singh's term alienation, which is discussed by Isabel Stengers in Conversation with Singh as a being separated from what makes you alive, a condition in which you also stop thinking, imagining and noticing particular beings and relations. My processes of observation in these fragile sites allow me to reveal the dilemmas inherent in my actions and to acknowledge that I am part of these complex relations in what Singh refers to as multi-species entanglements. In my practice as research, I see the caves not only as entities, but also as Haraway's term figuration, that is, semiotic diagramming, which comprises entangled threads of knowledge, practice and power in both a global and a local sense. Crossing their fluid borders, thresholds. As we cross the threshold and swim into the first chamber, we disturb a large colony of feral pigeons, rock doves, returned to the ancient breccia cliffs from railway arches and municipal buildings, whose sharp wing clap and flutter breaks the soft, repetitive noise of their purred voices. We spin round and round in the water, gazing upwards to the high roof. The air is filled with floating downy feathers. Thresholds can be described as points or zones of change from one state to another. The concept of ecological thresholds emerged in the 1970s, and they are commonly used in analysis of surprising and dramatic changes in the state of ecological systems. Ecological thresholds are related to a strong, non-linear response in ecosystem state at the critical level of an environmental driver. The Resilience Alliance, an international collective of research scientists from social and ecological disciplines, defines an ecological threshold as a point which, when passed, causes a system to flip to a different state, no longer able to return to its original condition. Concern about abrupt and potentially irreversible ecosystem thresholds is increasing, as they will have significant implications for the well-being of all biota and are forecast to increase with intensifying climatic disruption and environmental degradation. At the threshold, or place of entering a marine cave, conditions change. Cave biologists define the limit of the threshold zone as the region where illumination from the cave entrance is enough to support the growth of vascular plants. Conditions particular to cave threshold environments provide a niche for assemblages of organisms where they will be protected from high solar radiation and the extremes of drought and atmospheric changes in temperature. In conversation, cave biologist and geologist Dr. Chris Proctor explained to me that ecological transitions exhibited within marine caves are substantially more varied and complex than those typical of inland caves. In addition to the usual threshold, deep threshold and dark zones resulting from abiotic light, temperature and humidity gradients, a variety of littoral, supralittoral and nearshore habitats and zones can be present. Other physical conditions, such as wave surge, can change rapidly from the entrance to the deeper part of a cave, and this often results in a pattern of biological zonation that can contain communities of terrestrial and aquatic, maritime and non-marine fauna living in close proximity. A sea cave threshold is an environment where inhabitants find comfort and refuge, an ecological niche within narrow margins and especially vulnerable to increasing dynamics of systems change. Crossing the threshold of the sea cave. In preparation for this research trip to Livermead's marine caves, I had conversations with open water swimmer Sophie Pearce. Sophie describes entering the chamber. At the first cave, you're entering under an arch and you get an incredible light effect. It's quite a well-known phenomenon that divers talk about. They look as though they're lit. The caves look as though they're lit from underneath, so you've got this amazing glow of light just under the water where the cave walls are, and you swim in and you're in a cavernous space with the water gurgling and running up and down the sort of inner caves, and it can be a kind of groaning noise. The water is constantly churning through, and you're moving and being moved by the water. As the four of us swim into the cave, threshold sentience brims with a wealth of sensations in the haptic atmospheres. Swimming into this unfamiliar environment stimulates a multitude of sense memories where the strangeness of the atmosphere has a profound influence on consciousness and understanding of space, sensation and materiality. In my practice as research and my practice as artist, thinking with means attempting to alter the way we understand the places we occupy, inhabit and exploit in an everyday way. In the shore area, decentering anthropocentric thought patterns brings a sensorial estrangement and resensitization and a readiness to be changed by the attempted encounter with the sensoria of others, the we use of terms insensible. We are at a threshold collectively, globally. We are in a state of violent change. In Torbay's marine conservation zone, I can clearly apprehend the pressures of practices which are become normalised. Yet working to the rhythms of the tide in this porous, breathing, diverse habitat In the undersides, the openings beneath dense urban occupation, I think with, and think what can be unlearned by imaginatively engaging with the environment of cave threshold, inhabiting cave threshold in the now.